guys, this week I'm really excited to share this new mobile workbench with a Hideaway Miter Saw. It's great if you're working in a small space and you don't have room for a dedicated miter saw station, or you don't want to be hauling your saw up and down off of your workbench or working on the ground. So this is an all-in-one unit. You can use it to make all of your cuts, and then you can use it as your assembly table as well. Now I have full plans for you over on Bitterroot DIY, so I will put the link in the description at the bottom of the video, and you can also find links to all of the hardware and all the cool bells and whistles that are on it. I'll throw those in the description as well as in the full post over with all the plans. So with that, let me show you how I built it.
I like to keep my workbenches simple, so I usually stick to building them out of sets of 2x4 frames. I just drive 3-inch screws through the ends of the 2x4s to secure them, which makes assembly quick and easy. If you prefer not to have exposed screws, you can always use pocket holes, but I usually just don't get that fancy for a workbench. Don't forget to square up each frame as you're building so your workbench will be flat and level. I use a small speed square in each corner as I'm working my way around the frame. I just line the boards up with the square so I know I have a perfect 90 and then drive the screws in. As always, you can find all the dimensions for these frames in the plan set. Just follow the link in the description. Once I finished the frames, I attached the legs. So I just started by attaching 2 legs to the top frame and then to the bottom frame, and then I flipped the whole thing over and attached 2 more legs on the opposite sides of the frames. So I did that twice for both sides of the workbench. Now you'll see that I did change the design a little bit in the plans after putting this together, but we'll get to that in a minute. For now, all you really need to know is how I secured the frame to the legs. When I'm putting these together, a spare 2x4 works great to make sure the legs and frame are even. I just butt the 2x4 up against the frame and legs and make sure they're both flush to it. Okay, this is where the design change comes in. So you can see that I built the 2 side frames separately and then I attached them to a middle frame. I ended up having a little bit of trouble with it sagging in the center, so I updated it in the plans so that bottom frame is actually one solid piece, and that'll be a lot stronger if you decide to build this. Since I'd already made it this far, I ended up leaving it and just adding extra casters in the middle so it didn't sag, which worked out just fine, but I'd recommend building it as shown in the plans rather than how I did it here in the video. Now I get this question a lot on my workbenches. How do you measure the height of your miter saw tabletop? I just lay a board across it and measure from the flat surface that I set the saw on and transfer that measurement right over to the workbench. Don't forget to account for your tabletop thicknesses. Once I finished the overall workbench frame, I built the table for the miter saw. Now I put the measurements for this frame in the plans, but I definitely wait and build it to fit since it has to be pretty spot on so it'll slide. I left an overhang on all 4 sides of the frame, as you can see here, and that's where it's going to slide into the track. Then I attached 2x4s in the center for securing the jack. I centered them and then just used the jack to figure out how far apart to put them. Once it was all ready to go, I put it in place in the workbench and attached the inside set of 2x4s to form the track. ran a scrap 2x4 up and down each track as I was attaching them to make sure that they were spaced correctly so the frame would slide. It took a few tries to get everything right. I mean, this is a track system built from 2x4s, but I got it working after a few adjustments. Once it was all working, I flipped the bench over and attached the locking casters. I use particle board for the tabletops on most of my workbenches because it's budget friendly and gives you a nice clean work surface, but you could also use plywood or whatever you prefer. I just cut each section to fit and then attached them. You'll see here that I just used brad nails, but I did end up going back later and securing them with 1.5 inch screws. I was just being lazy at first, which is, usually how that goes. Try to cut corners and you end up doing twice the work, but went back and secured them down with screws later so it's nice and solid. Don't forget not to attach that middle tabletop section yet. It's just there for spacing when I did the side tabletops, but it'll be a removable section when everything's done. So now for the saw elevator part. I centered the jack on the bottom shelf and secured it with the bolts that came with it. Now this is a 24-inch scissor jack, which gives you enough clearance to get the saw all the way out of the way when it's lowered. I put the link in the description as well as in the tools and supply list over on the article with the full plans. At this point, I realized I had some issues with sagging in the middle, so I ended up adding those extra casters to take care of it. You shouldn't have to worry about that since I updated the design in the plans. The scissor jack is rated for 5,000 pounds, but I wanted to make extra sure that the miter saw table wasn't going to move at all when it was in use, so I added spots for 4 carriage bolts to lock it in place. If you have a longer bit or an extension, you can drill through both those 2x4s at once. This bit wasn't quite long enough, so I drilled through the first one, then I lowered the table to get all the way through the second one. Then I used wing nuts to secure the bolts. And now for the removable tabletop. I wanted to make sure it wouldn't move around at all when it was in use, so I drove small hanger bolts into all 4 corners, and the tabletop just slides on and off those bolts when you want to use it. Last but not least, I added some Z-clips to the bottom of the tabletop and the sides of the workbench so you can store it out of the way when it's not in use.
Okay, so now that I have walked you through kind of the whole build process, I do want to give you a heads up on a couple of things. So first thing, this shelf, it does have a little bit of give to it. So if you build this and you notice that this does have some movement, that's true of mine also. That RV jack, it's not perfectly rigid and neither are the 2x4s, so it has a little bit of movement in it. That said, that jack is rated for 5,000 pounds, so this thing is not gonna fall or anything like that, but it does have a little bit of movement. So every now and then when you're putting the jack up and down, you kind of gotta like re-square this if it gets kind of off kilter. If you just re-square it and then it raises the rest of the way up. So because it had a little bit of movement in it, I wanted to make sure it's really locked in position at the top when you're making cuts, because you don't want your saw moving when you're making cuts. So that's what I did the lag bolts with the wing nuts for. So when the shelf is in position for cuts, it is very solid. It doesn't move because you got 4 bolts in it, so 2 in the front and 2 in the back. It's definitely locked in position. But just wanted to, give you a heads up if you notice that there's some movement in there. That said, I mean, This is a 2x4 workbench. I tried to keep it as simple as possible so that anybody can build it. The jack is not super expensive. It's just, I was trying to keep it a simple system. So for a workbench, I think it works great. The only way that you're gonna be able to get something that's perfectly rigid and doesn't have any movement in it like it is if you like welded your frame and then did hydraulics and all that stuff, or like metal tracks with grease on it, something like that. But for the purposes of this workbench and just any workbench, I mean, I was really, really excited about how this turned out. But just want to give you guys a heads up. So I hope you enjoyed the project and good luck with the build.